mode. Good morning, everybody. We want to welcome you to our webinar today. It is our first webinar of 2017, so we're really excited to get things off with such a great start. I know we've had a lot of registrants for this webinar, so we want to welcome everybody today and get started right away. As you know, we're going to be talking about upgrading NAV today with our very own James Strack. He is part of our customer engagement team here at Innovia, and we're going to hand things over to him just about in 20 seconds. I just want to remind everybody two things. Number one, we do record this and all of our webinars. So if you want to watch it again later, if you want somebody else in your organization to see it, it'll be up on our website by the end of today. And our website is innovia.com. And if you have any questions, type them into that question box. I will get them called out and answered for you. So James, without any further ado, I hand it right over to you.
Well, thank you, Abby. I'd like to say good morning to everyone and welcome. The presentation that we're doing today is just points to ponder. A lot of our customer base is looking at upgrading to NAV 2017, and we've been talking to lots of folks about upgrades over the past 6 months. So we thought we'd just try to do a presentation. We're not going to really be digging into the weeds here. That could take days, if not weeks, but really trying to give you a very high-level perspective of things to consider when you're talking about upgrading to NAV and what you should be talking about internally, because it's important to have internal conversations when it comes to looking at upgrading. Upgrading is a very time-consuming process. Once you get to 2015 and 16, the amount of time it takes to upgrade actually drops off significantly. But if you're still looking at 2009 or earlier versions and trying to upgrade to 2017, it is a big process. So there's a lot of things to talk about, a lot of internal discussions to have to make sure that you're doing this for the right reasons, what's the benefit, and how do we leverage this to move us forward. So let's get this to work. So on our agenda, okay, we're going to do an overview of the process and things to be considered when you're having the conversations internally. We're going to have a discussion on should you upgrade versus re-implementation, and there's a lot of semantics to be battered around there, so just a brief conversation to let you know that there's different options for you. We're going to talk about the mods that you have. A lot of folks over time have modified NAV, and that was kind of the double-edged sword of NAV. You could modify it to your heart's content, and sometimes those mods come back to haunt you. Same thing with reports. You could do all kinds of custom reports, and you could make all sorts of modifications to reports. And sometimes those are good things, sometimes those are not great things. But I want to at least touch on that as well. And then we're going to briefly talk about something called cumulative updates. And this would be an area that gets overlooked. I would tell you virtually none of our clients and customers do cumulative updates. So we want to talk about that topic as well today. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions. If you have questions as they come up during the presentation, feel free to shout them out in the little chat box, and Abby will send them over to me, and we'll try to get them answered for you. So, step one, really, when we're talking about upgrades, the big question here is why. When we want to upgrade, someone's going to ask you why. Someone's going to want justifications for why we're doing upgrades. So some of the reasons might be it's an outdated version of the product. I mean, NAV is a product that is always being updated. It's always being enhanced. And you use it to operate your business. So the question becomes, do you want a product that's not supported, that's core to the operation of your business? And in some cases, you're fine with that. Some cases, you're not. Our suggestion, of course, is that you do stay current and that you're on versions that are at least supported by Microsoft. We as a partner would support you regardless of the version you're on. We do have clients that have versions of 5, 5.1, 4.0. Last year, we actually upgraded someone who was on version 3.2. So it's not uncommon for people to have all sorts of different versions of NAV out there. But one of the reasons you may be discussing upgrading is that it's just an outdated version and it's no longer supported. And again, it's core to the operation of your business. So what happens if it fails? What is the risk to the business if you have a significant issue with an unsupported product that's core to the operation of your business? As your partner, of course, we would support you and do everything we can to help you. If the problem is a code issue that we would have to go to Microsoft for, Microsoft is not going to provide support for products that are out of date. So it's a risk, but something to be considered because it's about managing where your risks are. The cost of modifications and making changes to an outdated version is something else that you may wish to consider. There are times that we talk with customers who say, they want to write some mods and they want to make changes to NAV, and then they're a fairly old version. And the question becomes, is that the best use of money? Is that where the value is going to be brought to the company? So just something to be considered. The desire to leverage enhancements. Most of the newer versions, as they progress, of course, are going to have different options, new features, integration into the Office suite, things like document storage. So there's going to be lots of different things that can come from leveraging the enhancements of the new versions. So probably one of the bigger reasons people do upgrade is they want to take advantage of something. We've been doing this in spreadsheets. We've been doing this on pieces of paper. We want to automate processes. We want to streamline some processes. These features are all built into a newer version. So that's a great reason to want to say, hey, it's time for us to upgrade and leverage some of those enhancements. Modification of processes. This is probably one of the harder ones. When you're doing processes, one of the things we want to look at when we're upgrading is it's a great time to revisit your processes and say, are we still doing things the way that's in our best interest and best value to the business? In most cases, you are far more knowledgeable about NAV today than when the first implementation was done. So you have learned over time that there are better ways to handle processes. There's features in NAV that you aren't aware of. You have opportunities now to leverage those features and streamline. So it gives us the opportunity to review the business process for relevancy. Has your business changed? Have you had growth? Have you had acquisition? Different things like that to give you the opportunity to take the time to pause and take a step back. You may have growth and expansion. This is a huge leading factor for many people when they're looking at upgrading, is the fact that they've had a lot of growth. And when they've had growth, that may drive that need to upgrade because we need to take advantage. Things we could do by hand or things you could do on an Excel spreadsheet and outside the system when you're a certain size was not a problem. But as you grow, those problems begin to multiply, they get exponential, and all of a sudden they start to implode because they just can't handle the volume. So many times growth has forced changes to remain effective and competitive. Same thing with infrastructure changes. When you've had the growth, maybe you now have multiple offices over multiple states. Maybe you now have workers who are trying to work remotely and out of their homes or in smaller offices. So visiting all of that with the growth. When you're dealing with the growth, mobility has come of age, and that's what we see a lot of people working on. So do we want to look at cloud technology? How do we handle the mobility of our employees? How do we deal with the multiple offices or more mobile workforce? And then there's always the one about, well, everybody else is upgrading, which is, we're seeing a huge growth in upgrade, but true. But like your mom probably said, if everyone jumps off a cliff, should you do it? That's not the reason to do it, is because everyone else is doing it. But when you look at why other people are doing it, they're doing it for a reason. And so it's important that if you belong to NAVUG, and if you don't belong to NAGUG, we really suggest you do. The National User Group is a great resource for talking to other customers and talking to other NAV users and finding out, how they do things. So you're not just getting information from partners, you're getting real-world experience from people who are in the trenches every day working on NAV. And ask them, well, why did you upgrade? What's the benefit? What did you see? So it's just not you looking internally, but you have the whole collection of other NAV users who can give you a lot of information of why they saw significant benefit. Are there benefits and costs to it? Are there ROIs for doing it? Do we do the change just for change's sake? That's the one thing we don't want you to do. We don't want you to say, we're just going to upgrade because we upgrade. There really wants to be value. We want to focus on justifying why and what's the investment. It's a big investment when you invest in NAV, and it's core to your business, so let's have really significant business reasons, ROIs, values that say this makes sense to us. As we continue on with that whole process, it's a great opportunity to revisit how all your processes work and where improvements can be found. One of the things we're doing more and more of as a service to our customer base is what's called value stream mapping. Sometimes you might have heard it called business process mapping. And the goal here is to look at all your processes before you upgrade and take a look and say, we're going to revisit how we handle an order, how we handle production, how we handle our payable process, our purchase order process. Let's revisit the way, our QA department works. Before we even think about upgrading, let's take a big overview of how we continue to do our processes. And are we doing these processes the same way we've been doing them for 20 years? So doing value stream mapping is a great opportunity to revisit all those. And when we do those, you end up doing what's called the current state. So this is how your process works today. And this is a nice practice, because this is a practice that can be done and is really software agnostic. This is just a business process. So you look at your business process and you say, this is what we do today. And then you build a future state that says, but this would be the ideal way we could handle it. This would be the most efficient way we can handle it. Once you've done that, it's very easy to take that and say, okay, how does NAV do this? How do we leverage NAV to make this work? So in this chart, you'll see that. We define our goals. We define the strategies. We determine current state. We define your gaps. Then we figure out a plan to how to get you there. Once we've done all those things, then doing the upgrade becomes much more streamlined because we know where we're trying to go. And we're just not upgrading for the sake of upgrading. We have really set goals. You have a roadmap of how to get there. So taking the time to look at all of this really helps you in the upgrade process. So we strongly suggest that whether you call us in to do it or you do it yourself, as part of the thoughts of upgrading, it's a great opportunity before you do the upgrade. Let's look at all those business processes and let's try to do some value stream mapping, and let's make sure we're still doing things the correct way. We're always amazed, and it's always a great exercise when we do these and folks look at us and say, really? I didn't know we were still printing 27 copies of that report and passing it around. We don't need to do that anymore. So it's just a great time to do that. We get asked this a lot, which is, how do we know the difference between the version of NAV that we're on and the current version that's being released of NAV? That's one of the easiest ways for you to see some general ideas. So what you can do is there's a website here, and if you go to this website, This will give you a chart that compares the differences, some of the highlights at a high-level view of the differences of the different versions of NAV. And if you take a look at it, you can look at the enhancements and you can see the value it may bring to the company, because not all those features may pertain to you, but some certainly will. Then you can select a few of those features and delve into them more. Maybe you want to see a demo of those features and say, hey, how will those really affect us? Or because you've done value stream mapping or it's part of your process, you can say, here's how this is going to help us. So here's how we're going to do better document management. We're going to get rid of our filing cabinets. We're going to drag and drop documents. We're going to send invoices out differently because we know that there's different options here. Full integration into the Office suite. That's a big issue for a lot of folks. So select a few of them out of the list, dig into them, and see the value that it brings. And you can look for ROIs within that. When you go to the website, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see this, and it's going to say, okay, here's all the different pieces within NAV, and it's going to give you a chart, the options that you can expand or collapse them based upon the little plus sign. And take time to give them just each a review. And you can have different departments and different folks within your company taking a look at that. But that's part of the conversation to upgrading, re-implementing, is knowing what decisions you're going to make, what advantages. So this will help the impact of your overall process. Now, I'm going to drill down just into one of these just to give you an example. So this is what it looks like. So on the chart, as you select your option, you'll see. Make notes of the things that you feel bring the most value. And this can be part of your discussions internally, which is very important to have. So you notice there's version 4.0 up through 2016 was the latest this chart was updated. But it clearly shows you that there's different things that are available starting in 2013 R2, 15, 16, 17 that are not available in the earlier versions. And every single one of these can be reviewed like that. So just click on the plus sign, that will expand the list, and then of course you can collapse it as well. One of the other things is, we keep hearing this, we've heard it for the past couple of years, we're going to continue to have these conversations, you're going to hear about this more and more every day, is the cloud has come to age. And what does this mean? And one of the things it means is that we need to take the opportunity when we're doing upgrades that right now all of your hardware, your infrastructure is all on premise, and it's time to just make that part of the conversation when we're talking about upgrading. So one of the things we should do is look at the hardware. Is it time to upgrade your hardware? In many cases, when you do a NAV upgrade, you're also looking at upgrading servers and the cost of maintaining those servers, doing the overall infrastructure. These are all things that need to be taken and looked at, and they should be part of the conversation. And it may be determined that, no, we're still going to stay on premise with our hardware, but it's a nice opportunity to do it and compare the cost. One of the other things to consider when we're talking about clouds and again, upgrading your NAV is your backups, your disaster recovery, your business continuity planning. Are those even part of your conversations? But they should be, because this, again, is software. It's storing key parts of your business. What happens if you have a failure? What happens if your server's crashing? Do you do your backups by tape, or do you even validate your backups, and do you even test them? In many cases, I've watched over the years, I've watched clients do a backup, take the backup tapes off, set them on top of the server, and then go home. Well, if they lose the building, they've lost all their backups as well. And then they never take those and validate that, yes, they actually work, and they can do a restore. So while you're doing this and looking at the cloud and looking at upgrading, that's another area to be having a conversation about, is not only should we look at, do we want to keep a data center in-house, but how do we want to handle our backup systems? Have we thought about disaster recovery or business continuity? What is the cost of having those systems? What's the support? What's the maintenance required? With the cloud, you've matured to the point that using it as an alternative may be the right decision for you. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't need tech support. You still have laptops, you still have desktops, you still have firewalls, you still have bandwidth connectivity. There's different things, but if you wanted to reduce your footprint from a data center perspective, it's certainly an option that's available to you today that may not have been available 5 years ago. And it's time to look at infrastructure, because with the infrastructure, when you're looking at it and you want to take a look at cloud computing, one of the biggest things we want to have people look at is redundant bandwidth to the internet. And sometimes that's not an option for you, but in many cases, there's more options available today so that you can have failover and redundant paths out to the internet than you've ever had before. And they're always updating our infrastructure. We're always seeing new fiber being run. And in many cases, you now have options between fiber and cable and wireless and different things that are coming of age from a technology perspective that might help in the conversation about whether or not it's the right time to move your infrastructure out into the cloud. So staying current, why should we even bother? Who cares we're on version 3.2? It works. Well, that's one of the questions you have to ask. But when we're staying current, it does provide you incremental steps, because part of the upgrade process is always, let's review everything that's going on in our business. We take a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of manpower to do this upgrade and revisit all your processes to say, are we being efficient? Are we doing it? If you're staying current and doing your upgrades, and we're seeing that you can do upgrades now in a very cost-effective, time-effective manner, you stay current, you get more benefits. And one of them is you take incremental steps in your business processes. So the last time you looked at your business processes may have been 5 or 6 years ago if you're in 2009. So it becomes a very large task. It takes an enormous amount of time. It consumes a lot of resources that distract you from operating your business. But if you're staying current on a regular basis, and we have plenty of stories to tell of people who've gone from 15 and what it took to get from 15 to 16 and now 16 to 17 is very, very minor compared to that initial jump from 2009 to 15. So we've seen where 2009 to 15 might take you 600 hours or 800 hours. That's a huge task. We do have a customer up in Madison who implemented 2015, and then to go from 15 to 16, it was less than an 80-hour process, which included testing and validation. And now they're looking at 16 to 17, and we expect the same sort of thing. So when you can stay current in a very cost-effective and, more important to me, time-effective frame, it really makes it more desirable. But what you get to do is you get incremental steps for reviewing your processes and procedures. The commitments for your staff and their time become far more minimal. And the gap between those intervals, you don't see significant changes in your business operations generally from year to year. But over the course of 5 years or 10 years, you can see a significant change in your business operations and goals. And it provides the opportunity to make those improvements in small steps, incremental baby steps, instead of taking this huge leap. It's just cost effective. When you look at taking these major changes from, say, 2009 to 15, 16, or 17, but once we get to this point, by doing upgrades on a regular basis, whether it's annual or every other year, you're going to find that it's much more cost effective and much more time management. And time, to me, is probably one of our biggest concerns and biggest issues that we need to have is worrying about the time that it takes to distract people from doing the day-to-day operations of the business to get these upgrades in and then to take advantage of these features. So if we're taking smaller steps, we get to take these features, we take those enhancements, apply them without disrupting the business, except at a very minimal level. And then continual improvements, and I keep saying this, is improvements in steps instead of leaps. So instead of doing leaps and bounds in huge amount of time where people get stressed and a little frustrated at times and they feel overwhelmed because they have their job to do and then they have to focus on all this upgrading to do. By doing these in steps like this, you will see continual improvements, but again, in small incremental steps instead of huge leaps. Minimal staff impact and business interruption. Probably one of the key issues if you wanted to argue why should I upgrade on an annual basis instead of waiting every 5 years. The amount of time that it impacts on your staff and the amount of time it takes away from you operating your business becomes extremely minimal if we do it on a very regular basis. This is also a great time to look at Dynamics 365. Dynamics 365 is a new product that Microsoft launched. There are some caveats to it, but it gives you the opportunity to look. This is a hosted service only, so you cannot have this on-premise. So this is a cloud-based product only. You get to look at it and say, is your current licensing model, is it still the best option? Are you able to use native NAV? Modifications are not something that you get to have when you deal with this Dynamics 365 product. And if you're only using the financials of Dynamics 365, it's possibly time to revisit this and look at this and say, is this the right option for us? Could we move to subscription modeling and find better cost savings? This also gives you some flexibility of adding licensing and removing licenses on demand. So when you're dealing with this in the cloud and you're dealing with Dynamics 365, one of your options is, oh, we have a busy season where we need to hire extra staff. You pay for those new licenses on a subscription monthly basis and then turn them on and off as needed. So therefore, there's some cost savings to that as well. When you're dealing with an on-premise environment and you say, oh, I have 5 new people I need to add, you are buying those licenses outright, you own them, you then pay maintenance on them, and that is an ongoing number. So, are you using financials only? That's one thing to look at when you're looking at Dynamics 365. How many modifications, or what modifications do you have? That is also going to be a consideration. And then to remember that with Dynamics 365, you have integration to Office 365, you've got NAV, you have Outlook, and Microsoft's also releasing their voice product that you can all tie together. So, upgrading versus re-implementation. That is one of the things. It takes time. This is an interesting conversation because for some people they say, well, you know, if I'm upgrading and I'm or re-implementing, are they not the same thing? And there's differences between what's called a technical upgrade, where you're upgrading your database and your code, versus re-implementation of revisiting how we're handling all this, taking out that custom code and saying we're going to work with base nav and we're going to change our processes, and we've got so much custom code that's vernacular and going through our system that it would be harder to remove it than starting from scratch and taking what we do know and bringing it back. So what you first have to do is make sure you develop a plan. Part of this whole upgrade process, we want this to run smoothly, we want this to flow, we want this to be a good transition. And the way to do that is between value stream mapping, internal conversations, but develop a plan. And take the time to meet with your internal folks, discuss what's going on, take the opportunity to look at making changes, look at things that will make long-lasting and impactful changes to the business. Again, process mapping, review all that. The one thing we want you to try to do is to avoid the trap that I've seen over the past 30 years, which is we walk in with a new system and they say, well, the old system did it this way, so we want it to work like this. And when you do that, then the question that I have to ask is, if you want the new system to work exactly like your old system did, why bother changing? One of the reasons to look at a new system is to say it will handle things differently, it will be more efficient. And we need to know what your old system used to do, but then you have to be willing to let that go and say, how do we do that in the new system, and what efficiencies do we gain, and how do we become more productive? But that's the thing we want to avoid more than anything, is to avoid that trap that says, well, the old system did it like this, so the new system has to do it like this. That will be a major problem that will cost you time, mods, money. You just need to be able to take that step away. And make sure the plan that you have steps and you have options and that you want to prioritize what needs to be done. You may find that this list of everything you want to do for the upgrade is huge. And you say, we just can't take this all at one chunk. We have to do this in steps or phases. So let's make a list, make sure we set priorities and say, these are the things that are most important to us, and this is what we can accomplish in this goal, in this window. And it may mean that there's other benefits or features that we may have to wait on and take in a phase 2 approach or a secondary approach because of budgetary concerns. Make sure we make a list here. This is one of the things we always want to talk about, is listing the benefits and drawbacks. We want to know what's the good, what's the bad, where's the positive, where's the negatives. So what are we going to get by upgrading? And are there going to be significant drawbacks to upgrading? Are we going to have challenges where our upgrade is going to create issues for us? Usually those are time commitments. And understand the timeline. If you're going from version 3.2 to 2017, you can't expect or should not expect that the upgrade is going to take you 30 days and life is going to be wonderful. We need to understand where our timelines are. We need to understand what it takes to get it done and the challenges that we're going to face. Okay. ROI versus cost of doing business. And this is a conversation we hear a lot of when we have these kind of conversations, is people want to talk about, well, what's the ROI for doing this? What's the ROI for getting this done? And part of the conversation is that there are times you can see a lot of efficiencies, and that there's a lot of efficiencies in ROI. And you can say, we're going to automate this process. We're going to change the way we handle the filing of the paperwork. We're going to handle the way we do sales orders, and we're going to be able to pick up X amount, a percentage of increase, or we're going to be able to do twice as much work with the same number of people. And there's a very valid argument, and you can show some really true ROIs of the value that this brings to the table. Occasionally, though, you also have something called the cost of doing business. You're working at your facility today, you have a building, you have a desk to sit at, you have office supplies, you have things that you just need to operate the business. And there's not potentially a hard ROI on that, but there's a cost of doing business. If I want to own a grocery store, I have to have groceries. I have to have a building. I have to have coolers. And you may not always find ROIs on all of these things, or they may be harder to develop ROIs. So sometimes just saying we need to do some of these things because in order to stay competitive, this is what it takes to stay competitive, and this is what it takes to do what we need to do. And then financing. We have lots of different options for financing. And the question is, are you going to try to finance this all at one time? Are we going to look at going out and leasing or finding outside financing. And it always becomes one of those questions of what's the best way to handle this and what's the best way to pay for the upgrade. Modifications and reports. This is always one I like to put on a separate screen for a separate conversation. This is one that you really need to take special care, and it's most often overlooked or neglected area. It's not always possible to force end users to test out-of-the-box functionality, but it's certainly you want to try to get there. And there are different ways of handling this, but it's certainly something you want to try to do, is take a look at modifications and your reports, and really, we want to challenge those. We want people to say, hey, tell me why this needs to be done. Tell me why you have to have this. You know, ask for justifications for those modifications and those custom codes. You know, review the request and review the impacts. You know, when you hear statements like, well, because I want to, it has to work this way, it always has worked this way, those should be challenge statements that say, okay, but is there a different way of doing it? Also, you have to look at the way things were done in the past. And that, to me, is always a big challenge, because everybody wants to do things the way they always were. That's where their comfort zones are. And so we see this all the time, where we end up with people doing things that say, you know what, we've done it this way forever, and so we want it to stay that way. They also don't want to take advantage of the new features, because they're used to seeing reports. They're used to seeing, hey, I always had a report that did this, so I need a custom report to do this. But that's not necessarily true. One of the things of using native NAV is that data may be presented to you in different options. And when we get to that, we talk about custom reports, because that's really, to me, also another area that kind of gets neglected, or people say, I've always had this report. You know, this is the way it's always worked. I've always had this report. I have to have this report or I can't function. If I don't get this report, the world is over with and we're out of business. We really need to ask people to use the software as is first. So one of the things I like to do is to say to folks, look, here's NAV with no custom reports. You know, one of the challenges you see between 2009 and, say, 2015 was the rewrite when you went to RTC of rewriting all the custom reports you had. And it was a very expensive proposition. But one of the things you could do is say, use the stuff that's in NAV natively. Try to find the information you're looking for, and you'd be surprised at how easy it is to get there. And so therefore, you no longer need these reports. So this goes back to, you know, one of my old stories. I managed an old mainframe system many, many years ago, and we had over 2,000 custom reports. Just a huge, obscene number. And when we upgraded the system, I got a request that we need these 2,000 reports rewritten in the new software. And what we really said to everybody is, let's pause, and we're not going to custom write any new reports until we've spent a fair amount of time, which I said 6 months, which should be a good window for people to have go through some month-end processes and validate that what their needs are and what they're not, what they don't need anymore. And what I found was that folks could then use the new system. They found ways to get the information and found out that it could be presented to them on a screen. They didn't need a report, but it was the only way to get the information out of their old system. So therefore, they just assumed they needed it in the new system. So we said, don't write any reports for 6 months. Well, what happened was, when that got done and the 6 months was over with, all of a sudden, we didn't have 2,000 custom reports. We had about 20. And there's a huge difference there. And again, it was a matter of the old system just could not present information or data to them except through reports. The new systems, and certainly NAV, has ways for you to filter information, look at data on the screen, produce a lot of information without actually generating paper. And Another story I tell on this is it was several years ago, prior to my employment with Innovia, that I had an off-chance meeting with a CFO out of Madison who was running NAV, and we were just sitting around uh, relaxing after a conference, and we were just talking about upgrade processes and things that we might want to think about and things of concern. Well, I mentioned many of the things I've just talked about here today, and that CFO, unbeknownst to me, then decided to actually use that and implement that process when they went from NAV to 2015. And they accepted the theory that modifications and reports really need justifications, and the users need to get out of their comfort zone and look at the new system in a very holistic manner. And by doing so, they've reduced virtually no modifications into NAV. Their success rate was very high, and their implementation time frame was extremely small. They, if I remember right, implemented 2015, I believe, in 30 days, because modifications, custom reports, all the things that would cause scope creep, okay, were just held to a bare bones minimum. And if someone truly couldn't justify the need, it didn't happen. And the business didn't suffer a meltdown, and they didn't suffer a financial collapse. It actually made them think outside the box. It made them leverage the software to a higher degree. And they took advantage of that investment in NAV and are using it far more efficiently than many folks are using it. So now, that next upgrade from 15 to 16, we did not have lots of modifications, lots of custom reports, was actually accomplished in less than 80 hours. Now, this isn't the case for everyone, but it does show, and how by putting things on the table can make a difference. Talk about it and say, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? Really get justifications and challenge folks. It's not always a comfortable conversation to have, but it pays off in the long run. Cumulative updates. Next topic I just wanted to touch base on. The nice thing about cumulative updates, you have to kind of decide if it's right for you and what does it really mean. And cumulative updates are often overlooked. So if you upgraded, or when you upgrade to NAV, say 2017 this year, one of the things you could look at doing is that every month Microsoft puts out enhancements, maybe bug fixes or some patches. And instead of waiting till your next upgrade to do all of this, you actually can do this in a monthly incremental basis. Instead of taking larger chunks of time, these updates, cumulative updates, can happen in a very short window, literally time in hours, not weeks, not months, but literally hours. And just depends on the extent of the cumulative update that Microsoft releases. But then you're able to take advantage of new features that they may release without waiting for an upgrade. So those will just be available to you as you move forward. And so that's something to think about as well. And that may help you, again, get more features and continue to improve your systems over time without waiting 5 years for the next upgrade. With that said and done, that's the end of our presentation. I'm certainly open to any questions anyone may have.
We do have a couple of questions here, James. Our first question, we have several modifications to our NAV Plus custom reports. Do you have a suggestion for how to evaluate the upgrade?
Sure. That's a good question. This goes back to that modification and report conversation where we need to challenge folks. And one of the things you can do with reports is there's a tool that can be put on your system, and you can run it. And what it does, it runs in the background, and it actually tracks the number of times you open a report and use a report. And it's a very useful tool that we started using when people were upgrading from 2009 into the RTC environment, when we had to rewrite all the reports, and we found out that they had, 500 special reports that were written. And the question becomes, okay, do you really want to pay to have all those done or not? And well, they say, well, we don't know. We don't know who's using them or why they're being used. So there's a tool that we can put on your system that will track that. And obviously, the longer it runs, the better information it provides for you. But it can then tell you when the time comes that, oh, by the way, yes, we have 500 custom reports. We use 12 of them. And so it's a great tool to help be cost effective and determining what you should carry forward to your next system and what you should not.
Okay, great. Our next question, I have to justify why we should upgrade. Our old version is working fine. What do we say to that?
That's another good question. In many cases, that's an understandable thing that's said. It's working fine. Why should we bother? One of the things to look at, though, is we get back to that. Is it still a supported product? Is it core to running your business? And if it's core and it's running your business, you really have to decide, at what risk do we have if something were to happen to it and it's not there. And you do the same thing when you look at things like insurance on your major, say you're a manufacturer and you have major manufacturing equipment. Do you insure your facility? What happens if you lost that facility? We need to look at your software as your technology because it's integrated into a lot of your business processes in the same light. What do we do if we lose this? What happens if something happens and we can't get any repairs done? Then you're scrambling and you're more in crisis management mode. So one of the things to look at is, again, the value stream mapping, compare the features, and talk about the benefits that you can leverage and the efficiencies you're going to gain by staying modern. And if you're a manufacturer, think of it this way. You had a piece of manufacturing equipment. It may still work, but if you purchase a new piece of equipment, it can run 10 times as fast, and you can produce 10 times as much in the same window. There's a lot of efficiencies to be gained. So it has to be looked at a high-level holistic view like that.
Okay, and our last question that we've got right now, James, what is the one thing we should do before we upgrade?
The one thing you should do before you upgrade is to sit down, I would say, do the comparison of the features, do that value stream mapping, and so you can really come up with a plan of what you're going to get from a benefit for upgrading. It's especially if you're going from 2009 to 17, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of manpower. You really need justifications of why it's worth it to you. So sitting down and coming up with a plan and taking the time to develop a long-term strategic plan is something that I think brings great value to that.
Okay, we do have another question, James. You stated the upgrade from 2015 to 2016 is quick and easy. What does the upgrade from 2012 to 2016 look like?
That's a great question. I personally don't have experience from 2012 to 2016 or 7, which would be 17 right now. The differences with the upgrade is going to be getting you to at least 15. It's going to get incrementally better. And one of the questions that always gets asked was, are you still using, are you using RTC or not? So the biggest jump we see is now for 13, I know from 13 to 17, with a certain amount of modifications, we're probably talking in the neighborhood of 400 to 500 hours, where from 2009 to that window would have been maybe 800 or 900 hours. So we're seeing incrementally decreases in the amount of time it takes once we hit this 2015, 16, 17 kind of window.
Okay, great. Right now, that's all the questions we have. I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into that question box. Also, we have been recording our webinar, so it's going to be posted by the end of the day on our website, which is innovia.com. And James, that looks like the end of the questions. So we want to thank you so much. It's been a great presentation. I know I've learned a lot from it, even though we work constantly with NAV. It's just good information to have about thinking about upgrades. And if anybody needs any more information, you can contact us, any of us here at Innovia. Of course, you can contact James, you can contact myself, or you can just contact our general info line and we'll get you to the right place.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the next webinar.